How's it going, you guys? Welcome to part 4 of the Tinder clone, and in this video we will be continuing off from where we got to in part 3. So at the end of part 3 we had built this messaging system and it was very basic. We haven't styled it up or anything, so that's where we'll begin this lesson. And I just want to remind you guys before we jump into it that I am releasing a new course on Ruby on Rails, so do subscribe to that via the link below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel here also and like the video. So going back to the video now, within our browse controller for our open conversation method, we are loading the messages for that conversation if that conversation has been saved before. So then within our view, we will add a condition here to say that we only want to display this send message prompt if this is a new conversation. And then within our partial load here, so we're loading a partial to load the conversation messages. So again, we only want to show that if the record or the conversation has already been saved before. So now going into our messages partial, I'm going to try and clean this up a little bit and add a little bit of logic here. So firstly, we're going to say that if this message has already been saved, then we are going to output the body of that message. So we have to remember here that we are creating a new message in this partial at the same time. So the new message is if the user types it into the text field. So anyway, let's add some basic styling here for this. So we're adding two divs here, one to output the image tag into of that user. So we'll output the first image of that user account, and we'll make that image rounded, so using the rounded circle class. And we'll set a maximum size and width on this image. And we only want to show this profile image if the user actually has an image saved. So a quick way that we can do that for now is just using the images.any, but a longer term approach, we want to be using a placeholder image there in place of that saved image. So within our body message now, we're going to add some styling around that. So now that we have the basic HTML that wraps this message, we can go ahead and style this in our style sheet. So let's create a new class for the conversation message, and we will set a background color. You can change this color to anything, but I've just got a light gray color here at the moment. Let's reload this and give it a try. So reloading the page, we have got a mistake here in our code. We should be using the message.account, so the account of the person who created that message. So let's give this another go. And you can see here that they do have this kind of background color on the message, and we have got the image of that user, so that's a good start. So I'm going to move this into a new div to try and put this in one line, and we can see here now that we've got the image on the left and the message on the right, and I'll just add some spacing underneath each message to make that feel a little bit more natural. And so we can see here that we do have this partial loading multiple times, and we do have this select field happening multiple times. So let's try to fix this up so that we're not using this we're not loading this query every time this partial is loaded. So this is what is known as an n+1 query, and it's something we should really be trying to avoid for performance reasons. So going back to our browse controller now, I'm just going to include the account. So we'll use messages.includes account, and then here we can also, because this is active storage we're using to store these images, we will need to include the images also here. So we're loading the account and the images attachments. And there's a lot here to see on the logs, but I think this has worked. So we can see here that we're not getting the same repeat call on that database query. So everything is looking pretty good here. This is loading all of the image attachments. And you can see here that there is an individual database query for every single image that's being loaded. So that is for this browse section, and we'll try to fix this now. So going back to the browse view then, you can see here that we've got this user.images.first. So every time it's looping over this, it's trying to find all the images and grab the first one of that images array that's being pulled back. So let's have a look and see if we can include this images as part of the query. So we've got account.where, so we'll include then the image attachments, and we'll reload this to see how it looks. And you can see here that this has improved a lot. So we've got a lot less queries being made here. And we can see it's all grouped together as one query, so that's much better looking. So I've just opened up the Rails console now, and I'm going to hop in here and just create a new message. So I'm going to reply to this conversation between me and this other user. So I'm going to make a message just to see if we can style it up and see what the difference is in terms of how it looks with our own messages. So we'll do this via the Rails console rather than signing into the other account. So we do have something we missed there. We forgot to put the body in for that message. So as you can see here now, we've got the other picture of the person that we've matched with. And we do want to differentiate between our messages and the matches messages. So we can do that by styling these messages slightly different. So we'll push our messages to the right side of the screen and we'll make them a different color. So we have this float left class at the moment. So we can change this to left or right based on who creates the message. So let's add some logic for that first. We'll say message.account ID, and if that's equal to the current logged in user, so that's our account, then we'll float it to the right, otherwise it gets floated to the left. So you can see that has kind of worked, but we have these profile photos still on the left side. So what we can do here to style this up a little bit better is to move this code into separate views, or in this case partials. So let's move this logic further up our view a little bit. We'll say if this message is created by our user account, then we'll load one partial, and otherwise then we'll load a different partial. So let's set this up now. So we're creating two new partials here. One is called sent by me, and then the other is sent by match. So we will just copy this code out and then paste it into each of these individual partials. So we could have done this without having two individual views for this, but I just think it's nice to be able to separate the code a little bit here, that we can style each one up differently. It's very easy to update later without having lots of messy logic within our view. So let's add a separate style in for each of these based on who creates the message. And we can add in a CSS style to match that. So if it's sent by me, then we will wrap that around the conversation message, and then we'll have a different background color. So I'm inspecting this element using the developer console, and sometimes it's just nice to be able to play around with the colors on screen to see what looks good compared to your design. So this is using the Chrome developer tools, and once you click on a color, you can have this kind of pop up where you select the color and move it around. So it's quite nice. So we have a color that we like. We can move forward then with that. And it looks like I may have made a typo here when I set up these partials. So let's have a look, see what's going on. So the layout, this is why indentation is really helpful, because you can quickly see if you've closed off all of the tags, but in this case we forgot to include the if before our conditional. And we have a different message here now. So let's set these to partials to see if that fixes this. And in this case, it looks like we have got the view in the wrong folder. So we should have a messages folder here under views. So let's set that up now. And we can move these two files inside that messages folder. And we are getting another error message here, but it is a different error message. So it's telling us that the message has not been recognized, it's not been set. So what we need to do here is pass the value into the partial. So pass it in as a local variable. And that does appear to be working this time. However, for our messages, I think we don't need to see the profile photo for our messages. So I'm going to remove that, and we'll just keep the image for the matched user. So we'll keep the matches as the profile image, but for our account, we'll just delete it. So the styling is starting to look pretty good for the messages. So next thing we're going to look at is this messages tab. So we want to display a list of the messages that we have already started under this tab. So we'll begin this by rendering a partial from our browse view. So we'll render a partial of conversations/list. So we'll create that partial now within the conversations folder. So we'll create a new folder for that first. And then we'll add a new partial. So underscore list. So all partials start with the underscore. And then within this partial, we will say, we will loop over this conversations instance variable, which contains a set of conversations coming back from the database. And before we iterate over that array of data, we can ensure that some of the conversations already exist. So we'll check the size of this conversations array and ensure that there are some conversations there already. And then otherwise we can have this no messages to display paragraph tag. So within this loop of the conversations, then we will output the conversation.messages.last. And we'll also want to have the image and the first name of that user that we are matched with. So I'm going to create a helper for this profile thumbnail, and the reason I want to do that is that we're going to be using the profile thumbnail in multiple places in our application. So it makes it easier just to update that code in one place rather than in multiple different views. So let's set up an accounts helper, and we'll create this thumbnail method. So module accounts helper, and we will create this method. So profile thumbnail, and we'll pass in an account. And the output returned from this helper will be an image tag. So we'll create that image tag based on the account that's passed in. And then we'll add a couple of classes here just to style this up. So we'll add a conditional here to say if account.images.any. So in a previous video we created this profile bar, and if you remember, we do have an image in there already. So our account image is already in there and styled up. So what we can do is just copy the styles and also the width and height, and just move that across to our helper file, which means that we can actually update this code in our profile bar later to use this profile thumbnail helper. So it just makes it better to keep all that code in one place. But for our messages then, we will make this name of that user bolded, so we'll add a strong tag around that. So now I'll go back into our browse controller. I want to tweak things around here a little bit, so just try to optimize things a little bit better. So right now I'm going to change this mapping of the liked account ID, and we'll change that to a pluck.pluck method. And again, here for our users that we're loading, we will just limit the number of users that are being loaded. And the reason behind this is that if we have several hundred users on our platform, we don't really need to load all those users at the same time. We can load those in batches of maybe 10 users at once. So I'm just experimenting with this here to show how that works. So if we just load one at a time, we can see that we're only getting that output in the browser. So in this case, we can load 10 initially, and then we could have a method here to fetch another batch of 10 users, for example. And within this method, then we could retrieve this information using Ajax, and then we would take that 10 users, 10 rows of users, and output it back into the partial. So we could do that without reloading a page, but for this moment in time, we were just going to leave this here. So I'm just kind of highlighting it. We'll probably come back to that later if we get time. So there are a number of things you can do to make the application run a little bit faster, a little bit perform a little bit better. And one thing I want to do here is to rename the table that we have for our likes. And I want to restructure that data a little bit because currently what we were doing based on a previous video, and we put this together really quickly in the past video, but we have 2 records for every match. And what I want to do now is simplify that in terms of the number of rows that are being saved in our database. So we're going to have 1 row for each match. And in order for this to work, we are going to have 2 fields within that 1 entry in the database. So in this case, I'm going to rename the account ID to account 1. And then I will do the same for the liked account ID, but that will be account 2. So that way that when we like someone, it will create an entry for them, matching them and us, and they will only show up as a match if they also like us back. So that 1 entry will store all of that information. So we'll add an additional column here called account 1 approves. And this will be a Boolean value, so it'll be a true or false value. And we'll do the same again for account 2 approves. So it will only be a match if both of these are true. And you'll notice here in my migration file that I have got a up and down method. So in the case of the down method, that is if we roll our database migration backwards, we can undo these changes in a safe way. So I'm just, because we're renaming the table, changing column names, I think it's just safer to have a 2-way migration in this case. So we've got some issue here. We should be using rename column. And we'll do the same on our downwards migration. So let's try this again. And that looks like it is working this time. So now within our like model, I'm going to rename that to match. And we'll also rename the file to match.rb. And we will change the validation here then to account for these 2 new field names, column names. So account 1 and account 2, they need to be unique. And now I'm creating a scope for the matching of these 2. And since we have 2 different account fields, we will need to check both fields to find a match. So we're looking to see if either of these account 1 or account 2 columns contain the ID of this account that we're passing in. And then we will also check to see that both of these accounts, the account 1 approves and the account 2 approves, are set to a value of true. So they both need to be set to a true value, and that way we will have a match between these 2 users. So based on that, then we will want to return the accounts that we are matching with. In order to do this, I'm going to iterate over this matches array, and I'm going to add to this account IDs array that we have populated just directly above. So each time we have an ID for the account that we're matched with, we will add that to the array. So we'll say account1 is equal to the ID. If account1 is equal to the ID, then we'll return count2. Otherwise, we'll return account1. So basically, we want to be getting the matching account and not our own account. So we'll populate this account IDs, and at the bottom of this matches for scope, then we'll just grab all of the accounts based on those account IDs. So let's update this code. We'll say match.matches4, and then we'll pass in the current account.id. And now I'm going to duplicate this code, and this will be for recommendations. So this will be users that come up in our browse view that we can make a decision on. So in here, it will be slightly different criteria in here about what users get selected. So here we are selecting accounts where we have already made a decision about that account that we're trying to match with. So let's say if we have a user that comes up and we click the decline button or the approve button, we don't want to see that user again. We only want to see that user again if they like us back. So in this case, we are just selecting the accounts to ignore first. So the code directly underneath here that loops over the matches, in this case, we should just rename this to ignore IDs. So it's more clear what we're actually doing here, but the same code basically works for us here. We are just grabbing the account of the other person that we are trying to avoid in this case. So we'll say account.where.not, and then we'll use these IDs that we don't want to return. So within our controller then, I'm going to update this to match the new scope that we have. And we can delete that like code at the top. And then I'm going to use this includes image attachments here just for performance. So we're not getting that n+1 query. And again, we can limit this to 10 users at a time if we want to. So one thing to note here is that we should ignore the ID that we're passing in this case. So that will be our own account ID. So we don't want to return our own account in the recommendations because that wouldn't make a lot of sense. So now back in our account model, we can remove this old matches method that we have in our account model since we now have that within the match model. And something that would really be helpful for us would be able to quickly see the if there's a match between two individual accounts. So we did create that code in our conversations model. So I'm just copying that across to make it fit for our matches. So this will allow us to quickly see if a user is matched with another user. And something that I didn't mention at the start of this video is that a more complete version of this Tinder clone can be purchased from my website. And normally what I do is I build these applications and share what I'm building on YouTube to help other people see how I approach things and see how useful Ruby on Rails is for startups. But if you're interested in using this for your startup and don't want to build it all from scratch, I go ahead and build out a template that startups can use, and it really helps them get off the ground quickly. So I've sold a number of templates already, and the feedback has been pretty good so far. So do check it out on the website if that is something that interests you. So getting back to our browse controller, I'm updating the approve method here to include the new match.between scope that we added. So that's in place now. What we're trying to do here is just say that before we create a new record for the match, we are checking to see that if it already exists. And if it does exist, then we will just update that existing record rather than creating a new one. Normally in this kind of situation, you could use the active record built-in method called find or create by, but in our case we have two different account fields and we don't know the order in which these accounts are going to be added. So it just makes the criteria for selecting or creating a new entry a little bit more complicated than the normal use case that we would have. So I think in our case it makes more sense to have a custom method to handle that. So within our approved method, we need to determine which field that we're going to be updating. So in this case, we are going to check to see if account 1 is equal to, that's going to be our ID in here. So let's change this account ID to current account.id. So check to see if our account is account 1. If it is, then we will be updating account 1 approves to true, but otherwise then we'll do account 2 approves. So if the match is saved, we'll just comment out the code underneath that for now. And in the code above, then we also want to catch the scenario where the match is not present. There is no match created in the database yet. So there's no entry for at least 2 users. So in that case, we'll be creating a new one. So we're using match.new here, and then this match.save will save that as a new entry. So just clean this up by deleting some of this old code, and in here we could show the success message, but for now this is fine. This should be this functionality working. We can remove some of this old code here at the top, and it's looking much better. And now within our open conversation method, I'm also going to update here to use the new match.between. And now let's check this out in the browser just to make sure everything is still working correctly. We can see that we can close and open the window, and we'll try typing a message, and that is added automatically, but this field should really be cleared once we send the message. So we can do that by modifying the JavaScript ERB file that we have. So if we go to our conversation form field, we'll add an ID there so that we can grab this text area or this text field easily, and then within our JavaScript partial or JavaScript ERB file for conversation messages, we will just reset that field. Okay, so that's working. So I'm going to grab the code here from this approve method, and I'm going to copy and paste it down into our decline method. So we haven't really got a working decline button yet. So previously it just sends the AJAX message, but nothing happens in the controller. So in this case, we are just tweaking this to be a false value for the account 1 approves or account 2 approves. So really we could put this into one method because the code is so similar, and really you don't really want to repeat yourself in Ruby on Rails. That's the goal, but just to keep things simple here, we're going to leave it as it is for now. But do be aware that you could just modify the one method based on the variable that's passed in. So whether it's a success or whether it's a approve or decline. So let's just update AJAX within our decline on click event, and this all looks correct. So let's give this a try. And we can see here that the decline is being recorded in the database, setting the account 1 approves to false. And if we click this a few more times, we can click on the heart, click on the X, and we'll see in our logs that these are being updated correctly. So that's working now. The next thing I want to get added here is these messages of conversations. So it'll be a list of conversations that we've had with other users. So here we're going to say conversation.includes. So we're including the messages that are connected to that conversation. And we'll use a where clause here to say that where the conversation sender ID is equal to this value, which is our current account.id, and otherwise the recipient ID is equal to our current account.id. So we're trying to grab all the conversations that we are included in, and then we'll also include those messages at the same time, so that we don't have this n+1 query. So in our view, then we will loop over the conversations, and then at the bottom we're grabbing the last message in that conversation. So one thing we can note here is that the conversation.account, which is in the line 3 of this view, we can't really access the account in this way because we don't know which user is the profile image that we want to show. So we want to show the matching user's profile image and not our own. And we can't grab that from the last message because we don't know who the last message is from. It could be from us. So in order to do this, I'm going to create a new helper method called getAccountFromConversation, and we'll pass in the conversation into this helper, and the helper will determine which user account that we want to show the photo from, the profile photo. In here we can say if the conversation.sender ID is equal to the current account.id, which is our logged in account, then we will get the recipient ID, so we'll get the other field value, but then otherwise we'll get the sender ID. So we're getting the ID of the user, and then we will return that user from our matches. So we're using matches.select here to filter the list of matches that we already have. So we want to filter it based on the account ID matching our matched account ID. So it's good to move that logic out of the view and into a helper. And it also is quite nice, this approach, because it means that we're not making an additional database query. So we're just loading it from the existing accounts that we have. So we have a typo in our helper, but just adding that question mark fixes that. So now let's go and have a look at our browser and see how this looks. So you can see that we've got the messages here and the names of the user, but we need to style this up a little bit to give it some better layout. So we want to put this in a separate row, use a separate column. So this is just Bootstrap styling here, the HTML markup for Bootstrap. So that's a little bit better. We could probably make it better still. Let's put the message underneath the name. And if we did want this to be a one-line message, we could use something like ellipsis just to show a small amount of text. But for now, I'm using simple format to render it as paragraph tags. But yeah, we could do a lot of different things with that just to simplify the layout. So once we click on these conversations, once we click on these messages, I want it to load up the conversation that we have with that user. So in our JavaScript file then, I'm just going to duplicate this match tile code, and we'll call this open conversation. Again, this could be used as the same on-click event. We could use that same code and add some logic in there to handle it differently, but we can have it as a separate method here too. So I'm just adding the account ID to this data attribute. So data ID, we'll pass in the ID of that user. And that appears to be working. So what we can do here is go back to our style sheet and use the cursor as a pointer. So we can set the cursor to be a pointer so that we know that this is a clickable conversation, the clickable element. So to click on it, then it opens up that conversation. And we could also set a background color here. And I'm also going to add a border to the bottom of each of these messages to divide them. So it looks a little bit dark, the background color, so you can play around with this just to get the styling looking a little bit better. Add some padding, and I think that's pretty good for what we need. And it all works now. So I would like to get these onto one row, these tiles, these match tiles. So let's see if we can improve that. So let's wrap these matches inside a div. And already starting to look a little bit better. Now we are setting a fixed width and height on these matches. And the reason we're doing that is because we're using a background image to cover the matched tile. So it is a bit of an issue in terms of layout because it means that our tiles are not running the full width of the column. Can't style them so easily. So the next step I want to do is I want to improve these approve and decline buttons at the bottom of our slides. So when we're browsing users, I just want to improve the look and feel of these actionable buttons. So I'm using the stack, FA stack. So that's Font Awesome, has this class where you can stack these icons on top of each other. So I want to create this rounded background behind the actual image or the actual icon that we're using. So we have the heart in the middle, and then we've got a white background circle behind it. And the white on the gray background is a little bit difficult to see at the moment, but we could modify the background color of the page to make it stand out a little more. I'm just trying to figure out why my first icon isn't appearing. So it looks like I've put the classes in the wrong order. So I'm going to try and correct that now. So we have the FA stack 2x at the top, which shouldn't be like that. Let's remove that. And yeah, that's working. That's working this time. So we can change the color of the icons using the text success or text danger class. So that's part of the bootstrap class. So it's just the color element. So it's looking a lot better. Again, we can probably add a cursor for these. So when we reload the page, we can see here that there's no background image for this user. And in this case, we really want to at least have a background color on this profile so we can see the text, because right now it's very difficult to read what the name of the user is and their details. So we can add a background color for this, and I'm just going to have a dark gray color for that. And I'm going to open up the Rails console now and just destroy that last match. So just delete it, just to make sure that our images are working correctly with this new background color. And that's looking pretty good, so I think it's good enough for what we're trying to achieve. You could actually force users to add a photo before they show up in this list, but that's customized, or that's optional. Like, it's really up to whether you want to do that or not, but I'm happy enough for this case just to leave the profile active. So in this case, we will only try to load this background image if the user has already uploaded a background image. And we're also seeing that same issue here on the Matches tab. So once they're matched, if they don't have a background image, it is just completely white, so we'll add a background color for that. And it's very simple right now, but I think it's just enough for us to deal with the fact that they don't have an image. And the next thing we're going to look at is this edit profile page. Now, we haven't done anything with this in terms of styling it since we started this series, really. So I'm just going to take a few minutes and try to tidy this up and make it more presentable. So this is going to be the last video in this series for Tinder, but you can also buy this finished application on my store. It's on my website. So I'll be spending a few more hours on this just to polish it up, make it a little bit more presentable, just to finish it off and then sell it as an MVP. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure to check out the link in the description below for that. And if you're just following along and building this application while watching it, also take the time to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like, as it helps me get this video out to more people. And I really feel like creating this kind of content is good for the Ruby on Rails community, as it helps to get more people into Rails and really appreciate the values that we can get from using Rails, especially to build startups, to build applications really quickly. So going back to our application now, we have this edit account page looking pretty reasonable right now. I'm not going to do too much more to this, but I'm just cleaning up some of the old template code that comes pre-installed with Devise. So we have the ability here to set a new password, and we have this message that goes out if the password is too short, or sorry, if a password length is already set via Devise. So we will just output that if it has been set. And I'm going to wrap this in a small tag, as we don't really want to take up too much screen space with this. We'll say if the minimum password length is set, we will display this message. So let's add some basic styling to the button for our update. So we'll just add the button class for that from Bootstrap. We'll make that large. And for our photos, we can make them a little bit smaller. Possibly add some margin here to the top, just to give it some space. I'm going to move this cancel your account button. Maybe make this a link instead. It's looking a little bit better. And I could actually move that up to the top, this back button. So I'll be back to the main browse section. Let's say back to Tinder clone. Return to Tinder clone. And we'll float that to the right. And we'll make that a secondary button. So that looks pretty good. Happy with that. So now let's go back to the main browse view. And in here we need to add some information. So we have these fields here for jobs or location, but we don't have anywhere to store that data currently. So we will extend the Devise gem. So we have the Devise gem, which gives us the sign up, sign in ability, but we'll add some extra fields to that, to our Devise table. So let's add a new column for this called education. That'll be a string, and another one called location. Now we could do something different with location based on GPS coordinates, but for the sake of this video, we're just going to have a text string that the user can input. So if we run the migration now, see what happens. And we have an error here. It looks like I've made a mistake. Okay, so the column for the table, the table name should be accounts. For some reason I put that in as device. I'm not sure why I did that. So that's working now. And we'll have to add these additional fields then to our whitelist of parameters. So we do that within our application controller. That's where I have it set up for device. So just add those fields, and then we will duplicate the code here for our additional fields. So this is within the device views, the edit account we're doing this under. So registrations, and then we are editing the edit.html.erb. So I'll just remove these autocomplete and autofocus. We don't need those. We'll just update the label names and the text field names. And something we completely forgot about here is we didn't actually add the first name or last name of the user into this view. So let's do that now. Allow them to update their details. And we can also add a field here for the username. So we're not really using the username much at the moment, but we could actually do something with that in the future. But since we have that field in our database, I'm just going to include it here for now. And then for the description field, I'm going to make this a text area so that we can have multi-line content. So let's fill this out and see if it works. And what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to sign out first, and it will sign in as the first user that we have matched with. So if we go back to our seeds file, we can just copy the email and password and sign back in again. And if we click on messages here, you will see that we don't have a name visible. So we haven't set a name on our account. So this account we're looking at is our own one that we matched with before we signed out. So this adds some details to our account profile. So just fill this out really quickly, some basic details, and then we'll see if we can make this look right on the front end. So add a education, so add a school name here, and a location. And we need to put in our password to make this save. Okay. So we sign out again, sign in. And once we've signed in, the first user that we matched with was called Sarah. So what we can do here is just delete the match so that we see that user again on the front end. And I think we should have probably deleted the conversation too. But to prevent this from happening, we can edit the conversations list partial and check that the account is present before we try to load that conversation in the messages tab. So that fixes that issue. But what we wanted to do, getting back to the task at hand, we want to output the education and the location of that user. So let's do that now. So for this user, we haven't got any details set yet, because most of these accounts have very limited data when we loaded them from the seeds file. And I'm just trying to get the match between our first user and our account. So we did delete the match, but we do have a conversation record between these two users still. So I'm going to delete that conversation, and you can see here that it also deletes all of the attached messages. So I'm trying to see the user with the ID of 2, and we can see here in the HTML that it is at the bottom of the stack of slides. Now we're not really setting any ordering on these slides, so this is just coming in by default. So I want to see the education and the country or the location. So that's working pretty well, but we're not seeing, right now, we're not seeing any additional information. So we want to add an icon here for information so that we can click on the icon and see more details. So the more details will include the description. So now we're going to add this icon for each slide. So we'll have a span class wrapping this, and we'll use font awesome here to create an icon. So the info icon, that will be white color, and we'll give this a class name of profile info, and then we can use our styles to position that icon. So our style sheet will position that using position absolute, and we can set a value for the bottom and right. So we'll position that from the bottom and from the right. So we can see our icon here on the right side. And while we're here, I'm just going to update this recommended matches to order it by ID. Now the reason I want to do that is just so that I can debug this and test this as I go rather than having them randomly assigned. And I'm updating the position of this information button. I want it to be right at the bottom right of the slide, so right in the very corner. And I'm going to stack this the way we did with the controls underneath. So we'll have a background circle. So once we reload this, we can see that we have got the white background. So we'll need to set a black text on top of that. So I'll set the text to dark, and it looks okay. So that can work. So we do want to move it a little bit closer to the edge, just a little bit further. So I'll just tweak this. And then underneath we want to add a section for more details. So this will be the description for that account. And we'll use simple format to create a paragraph layout for that. So let's add some styles for this more details. And again, we're going to use the position absolute here. But you could do this differently, but I'm just going to use absolute because we have got the controls underneath set in a similar way. So we'll set this to top 400 pixels and the left will be 50%. So that's 50% of that container that is inside. And we'll have some padding. And you can see here it's directly underneath our image, but it is hiding our buttons to our controls for this approve or decline. So we can overlap those using the Z index, but we probably want to move those further down the screen. And we can use a class then to decide how far to push that down. So if the information box is open, then we can push it down further. So let's play around with that and see if we can get that to work. And because this is a text area, we don't know how much content the user will be adding. So in that case, we will set an overflow for this information area. So that will basically just provide us with a scroll functionality if the content goes more than the specified height. So we can see that in action. And by default then we want to hide this more detailed section. So we'll set that to display none. And then for the information point, we want to have the cursor as a pointer for that so that the user knows that they can click on that and it does something, just to make it more intuitive for the user. So if they're on mobile, that won't matter, but if they're on desktop, it's good to have that hover effect. So now in our JavaScript file, I'm going to add the onClick event for this info button. So when they click on this, we want to show the more information box. So currently the more details section is set to display none. So we're going to use jQuery here to find the nearest slide class. So we'll look up the DOM to find the nearest slide class, and then within that we're going to find this more details class, and then we'll assign that to this variable, and then we can call a .show on that, so that will make it appear visible. So currently it's set to display none. And that is working, but we do want to toggle this field so that you can click to close it again. So that's that part working. But we should then try to adjust the positioning of these buttons on top. So we can toggle the class for that also. So we want to move these controls down, and we have added the style sheet for this. We just need to toggle the class. So the class was open. Let's try this out again. And you can see that that has moved down based on when we toggle that description box. So that's going to do it for this video, and I really hope that you guys have enjoyed this series on building a Tinder clone. Of course, you can take it further by adding GPS coordinates, geolocation to filter matches, but for the sake of this video series, we just wanted to get something basic up and running. And I do really appreciate all the comments and likes I've got in the videos. And as always, if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell because I will be creating a lot more Ruby on Rails content in the future. And other than that, you can also purchase this Tinder MVP on my website. So check that out in the link below, and I will see you guys in the next video.